I've obviously been trained by the Royal Navy. I was in service for 22 years, spent most of my career at sea, and we sort of train and operate in a very different way to the US Navy. So I spent about a year at Britannia Royal Naval College doing my initial military training. From there, you basically go and do what we call fleet time. That is where you go and learn your specialist skills. So I spent 4 months in a ship learning about administrative tasks, and then over 9 months driving different ships. Ships like HMS Coventry, HMS Somerset, and also HMS Grimsby. The point that I mention about this is that our training is very different from the US Navy. It is focused as watchkeepers. That's what the warfare officer does. They drive ships and they fight ships. No engineering, none of the other tasks that are associated with the US Navy. And our training is aligned to STCW standards. I am an STCW Master Mariner, just the same as everybody else here. So I joined in January 2001 as an NCE, which stands for Naval College Entrant, also known as not completely educated. So what does that mean? That means I joined without going to university. In the Royal Navy, you do not have to go to college to be an officer. Those that do go to university for 3 years and then join the Navy. So I would offer that it's more about vocational training in the Navy than it is about having a college degree. So, why am I talking about this? Our training culminates in what we call Junior Warfare Officer course. That is where you go and do 2 weeks worth of academic examinations, whether that's in ship handling, meteorology, all of that good stuff to align to STCW, building on the training that you've already done. You then go and spend 5 days in a simulator. In those 5 days, you're assessed on multiple runs about operating a ship at sea in close coastal waters, about how to go and deal with emergencies, how to go and deal with various evolutions, etc., from restricted visibility to losing steering and man overboards. Now, the point is that training, that certification is what gets you your navigational watch certificate, and you have to pass those assessments to be awarded it. And as you can see from there, back in the day, it was all done on paper in the simulators. So, again, just talking about a little bit more about how we operate. We do not operate like the US Navy. We do not have 20 people on the bridge. At sea, you have an officer of the deck, and then that is supported by an able seaman who will be your helmsman, an able seaman who will do your tactical communications. Depending on where you're operating, you may well have a second officer of the watch. What that generally means is a cadet, a trainee. So your job is to go and train them in watchkeeping as you go along. Once you're trained, we then progress people throughout their career. So in your first job, you'll be an officer of the deck, driving the ship from point A to B. You'll then go and do a 4-week navigation course, which is called Preliminary Navigators Course, where you learn about visual pilotage. Then you have to go and do another navigating course called Fleet Navigators course. That is 6 weeks, where again you learn about visual pilotage, but at speeds of up to 24 knots. And that allows you to go and navigate a destroyer or a frigate. Now, from this, what you've got to understand, especially in terms of visual fixing and our bridge organisation, is that the Royal Navy does not and has never trusted GPS. As a officer, if you're inside of land and the captain came to the bridge and you had a GPS fix on, the brass rule that you keep on the bridge would probably end up around the back of your head. Obviously not something that we can do for training purposes anymore. But the point was that that was how you were brought up, not trusting GPS. And so a good example of that was when I was in HMS Kent. So 2006, operating in the Mediterranean just to the east of Gibraltar. We're holding in a box getting ready to go alongside for ammunitioning. We're only going to be there for about 24 hours, which is enough to get a good 18 or 19 pints down your neck. But the point is that we're operating here. We've got to leave the box at about 0400 in the morning to make the RV. Now, I have only just joined this ship. I have never been operating a ship at 21 knots, so this is a little bit new to me as, at this point, a qualified officer of the watch, but somebody who is going through the platform endorsement process. What that means is I'm learning about the systems on board, and I have to be platform endorsed by the captain to be able to drive the ship as a qualified officer of the watch. The ship itself, in this case HMS Kent, is a cod lag ship. What that means is combined diesel, electric and gas. She's fitted with 4 diesel generators that provide power to 2 electric motors. With 2 generators, you can support all of the ship's weapon systems and drive the ship up to a speed of about 11 knots. Increase the number of generators, you can get up to about 14 knots. Then you've got the 2 gas turbines for sprinting, so you can come up to 21 knots or 28 knots. The reason why I mention that is very complex system, and we're screaming in at 21 knots. So I'm fixing on paper every 12 minutes on GPS. They're looking good fixes because I know I've just done my report to the captain, and the captain likes to get up early and catch the officers' watch out for bad watchkeeping. We've done a bit of math on the paper chart, and we've worked out what is the visual range of Europa Point Light, which is at the southern tip of Gibraltar. We've got our lookouts keeping a diligent lookout off the starboard bow. So I'm about 5 minutes out now thinking, I should have seen this light by now, and I'm getting a little bit nervous. At which point my helmsman pipes up and goes, "Boss, I can see it, it's on the port bow." Now, for those of you who've been to Gibraltar, this creates a bit of a problem, because to get into the bay, you've got to go around the rock, not through it. So I'm now trying to figure out, what have I done wrong here? I, by this point, am a relatively competent officer of the watch. I can plot a GPS fix a lat and long onto a chart. But I'm still going to check myself, because have I been an idiot and mistaken my minutes or whatever? So, nope, they're all good. So I take a visual bearing of the light. Obviously, it doesn't time with my fix. What is going on? Eventually, as we get closer, we've now got radar. So now I can start getting a good 3-point fix, which is about 3 miles away from my GPS fix, and remains to be. So talking with the officer of the watch, we make a decision. We come hard left, get the rock on the right side of the bow onto the starboard bow, and carry on into port. Captain comes to the bridge, and he's like, "What the hell are you guys doing?" Thinking we're a bunch of clowns, and we've now had to take him through our reasoning. He's happy that we haven't driven into the rock. It's all good. We call the maintainer to the bridge, we reset GPS, we proceed alongside, everything is good. But the point being that once we got alongside, we had to go and recheck what was wrong with our fixes. Well, the answer was nothing. And actually, when we got alongside and checked the GPS and reset it all up, actually the GPS was tying in. But overnight, for whatever reason, had been consistently 3 miles out for the entire evening, because we plotted all the fixes, recorded them from the nav book, plotted them all. So I don't know what that reason was to this date, but it was a big impact on the day. But the point being, Captain was quite happy with how we'd navigated, built up our fixes and all that. So from the Royal Navy, that's a bit of a win. However, it's not always been the case. Our last major grounding was HMS Nottingham back in 2002. HMS Nottingham, Type 42 destroyer, was operating in and around the Pacific, just off the coast of Australia. My wife would like that, although that's obviously where we sent our criminals for a number of different years. But the point being that they were operating off of Lord Howe Island, having just had to medically evacuated one of the members of the ship's company. Now, at this point, the young officer who was on the bridge was with the officer of the watch. The captain is going to come back by helicopter, and they've got to go and get onto a flying course so that they are then ready to go and receive the aircraft on board. The young officer is diligently fixing, no problems at all, and the officer watch is concentrating on getting the information from the principal warfare officer that the aircraft's en route, making sure that he's on a steady course and speed, that all the flight checks have been done to land on. Unfortunately, as the aircraft lands and they're putting the lashings on, the ship obviously has to maintain a steady course. And the officer watch gets a little bit nervous, because as he looks out, there's this big patch of wash in front of him. And so he calls back to the second officer of the watch and is getting a little bit nervous. The lashings are on. He decides to start altering the ship, but it's too late, and he's just struck Wolf Rock, which is a very well charted rock off of the coast of Lord Howe Island. Now, in navigation terms, the positive thing was that the YO who was on the bridge plotted exactly when they were going to hit it. He just didn't tell anyone. His EP was absolutely spot on. The output from it, though, was that the ship started to sink by the bow very rapidly. The accommodations are up there for some of our junior enlisted. I actually had friends on board, and we nearly lost the ship. They had to start shutting down the hatches to stop the flooding from breaking the watertight barriers, and at one point they trapped 4 sailors into a compartment and were going to basically let them drown. Fortunately, they brought back a little bit of time with the damage control effort, were able to open the hatch, get the 4 guys out, close it again, and they saved the ship. But in terms of the damage and the embarrassment, there you can see how much of the front of the bow was lost, and the damage does go a lot further back. In embarrassment terms, the ships had to be put onto a low loader and driven all the way back from from Australia to the UK, where it was then at a cost of 26 million repaired. This was one of the key incidents that drove the Royal Navy to realising that we needed to move to electronic navigation. Not because our navigation practices weren't very good, but because of the advantages the system offered us in terms of improved situational awareness, improved support, and also the warfare support that it would offer. So just after this incident, ECPINS, which is an OSI solution, was approved for use on board ships, and over the next 10 years they started fitting these systems. Now, it's at this point that I want to talk about 2 different terms, okay, because I think these terms are important. The first one is education. What is education? The process of acquiring knowledge, skills, values and beliefs through formal or informal learning. Education is broader in scope with the aim to provide well-rounded understanding of a particular subject or field. Now, when we think about education, that is a lot of what our various organisations deliver. Certainly in terms of MyTags, most of our courses are there to provide education. So what's training then? Well, training is the process of imparting specific skill sets, knowledge and abilities to deliver a specific particular job or task. The goal is to improve performance, and you'll use hands-on practice. So we use simulation and assessments to ensure that those skills are effectively applied, okay? So they're 2 very different things. So again, why do I talk about this? Well, the question is, what is enough training? What does that actually mean? At MyTags, when I look at our courses, we probably only offer 3 or 4 courses that actually offer valuable training. The rest of them are education, I would offer. So, as I said, I have served as a preliminary navigating officer and a fleet navigating officer, but also undertook specialist navigation training. For the Royal Navy, this is our highest level of navigation training. There's only 4 navies in the world that do it: the UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. So what is it? It's about driving a ship at 28 knots through the west coast of Scotland using an echo sounder, a sextant, and a stopwatch for 2 weeks. Before that, you go and do a week in a simulator just to make sure you're not going to go and crash the ship. But then there's a whole load of course, academics with it. Now, why do I mention this? Successful completion of the course earns you a postgraduate certificate, as a diploma from the University of Plymouth, and in Royal Navy terms makes you what's considered a subject matter expert in Royal Navy navigation. So from there, in terms of developing policy, whether it's to do with electronic navigation or other means, that's what our spec ends do. They also go and navigate our aircraft carriers. If you were to look to the US Navy, the navigator of an aircraft carrier is an aircraft pilot, which is a very interesting position to be in when you think about the size and capabilities of that vessel. So again, I'm talking about quite a lot of different topics now, but the point is that how many people here have done ECDIS course? Okay, what would you describe ECDIS course as? Education or training? Training. I would go the other way. It's 5 days of sitting there in education. Does it actually train you how to operate the ship at sea using ECDIS? Does it train how to operate in a GNS denied environment? No, it does not. One of the biggest challenges for the militaries of the world, but also those supporting operations as well, Military Sea Lift Command and also Merchant Mariners, is how do we operate in a GNSS denied environment? Now, I think we can all agree the chances of that happening are quite high. GPS can be shot down, it can be jammed, and also there are cyber means of neutralising it, just as there are of the other GNSS systems. As a ship, we turned off all GPS on board. And therefore began our operations. Now, as navigator, I had highlighted some slight concerns about this training. How many people have sailed in the Persian Gulf before? Probably quite a number, absolutely. So the bottom is pretty flat. There aren't many contours that you can go and distinguish and use for the benefit of navigation. We're outside of land, so I've got no visual marks to fix. Also out of the radar detection range of land. Okay, so that's a bit of a problem. And they started the exercise at 2200 after sunset, and we're going to finish it at around 0400 before sunrise. So the question is, how the hell now do I navigate on EGDIS? Because the reality is, other than just let it operate in DR mode, there is nothing else we can do without GPS. And as a task group, we did that for about 3 hours until we realised that we're about to go and put half of the task group through Iranian territorial waters, which would not have probably been a great idea. So we had to go and call a halt to the exercise and then go and move to some better areas. But the debriefing point made a very clear point. None of the ships realised, apart from us as the Nav Guard ship, that they're about to go inside territorial waters of Iran, because no one was set up to go and navigate in that GNSS denied environment. So again, I talk a bit more about training. As a specialist navigator, I became what's called a dirty FOSTI bastard. Apologies for the language. What that meant was that our Fleet Operational Sea Training Organisation, based out of Plymouth, I was Staff Warfare Officer, and it was my job to go on to national and international warships and assess them in navigation. The reason why they used to call us dirty bastards was because one of the key things I used to do was carry a personal GPS jammer. As we're going out of the sound of Plymouth, you would then turn that on in your pocket and see the reaction of the ships. Now, generally speaking, and I'll be honest, a lot of the European ships and British ships were pretty swept up in how to transfer over to EP Auto, but also how to use visual bearings, a gyro, to use the sign rule, and to go and work out whether port or starboard of track and how much safe water. There are other nations that were not so practiced at which point as staff would have to jump in pretty quick because they were trying to drive over breakwater. But my point is that building up that knowledge could only be achieved after about 6 weeks of hard training. We'd do this week in, week out. We'd go and do it through what we call green shoals, which were training shoals just off the coast, where again they would have to use visual bearings and fixes every 3 minutes to keep their EGDIS up and running and to make sure that they could safely navigate. So again, this is where I come on to the output about embracing electronic navigation and what it means. When we swapped over, or when I swapped over from paper navigation to electronic navigation, it was not a smooth transfer. I did EGDIS course thinking that I was trained. I realised as navigator within about 2 days of stepping on board, I was not trained and did not know how to use that system. I also remember sitting there at anchor waiting for a dirty FOSTI bastard to come on board who was going to do a navigation assessment for us and had to go and check the configuration of the system before we sailed. We as a team had spent about an hour and a half setting up the system good to go. Unfortunately, he spent about 3 minutes clicking through the menus and said, "No, you're not safe to sail and you have failed this assessment." Well, it was at this point my friend Mike Colvin, who was the senior officer watch, ripped his headset off, threw it onto the deck, shouted and screamed a little bit along the lines of, "Well, the book of reference, the manual, is a load of rubbish. Whoever wrote that should, piss off," basically. The unfortunate part was that the FOSTI who was on board was the guy who wrote that book and told us that, and it took us about another 3 weeks before we were able to pass a serial. But the point was that I realised very quickly there's a difference between education and training. I've listened to some great comments over this afternoon. I've really enjoyed some of the discussion about STCW and about the Coast Guard. For me as my tags, it breaks my heart every day that I have to go into a classroom and see people training on paper. Just to be clear, that is not an STCW requirement. That is a US Coast Guard requirement, because at the moment the US trains to a standard set by the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard does not know what the standards are to operate safely at sea. They don't understand electronic navigation, and that professionalism, that professional credibility really should be stemming from them if they own the examinations, etc. So what I'd just like to wrap up with, again noting the time, is just to suggest this. Training versus education. We should all be really asking ourselves, what are the difference? When was the last time as a ship, whether it's as a master or whatever, that you decided to turn off GPS or even just change the settings on your ECDIS to see whether the bridge team could, one, identify there's a problem, and two, would know how to react? Because that's what we're going to have to do in the future. That all ties in for me about a culture of professional curiosity, but also professional pride in navigation. As the Royal Navy, we still hold pride in navigation. When we sail in and out of a port, we do so by driving the ship. By that, what I mean is the navigator stands at the front with a notebook, as in a paper notebook. He's written on the clearing bearings, the turning bearings, the head mark, and uses math to work out when he's going to turn the ship. He provides a verbal commentary to the master and a pilot if they're embarked. The point is that ECDIS does not get involved other than to say ECDIS concurs or ECDIS disagrees. The captain's ears will only perk up if he hears ECDIS disagrees. So it's all about the ship driving ECDIS and not ECDIS driving the ship, which is something that I think we need professional curiosity about and professional pride in navigation. So as I say, I apologise to have kept you far later. I just again offer those thoughts. If there are any questions, great, but otherwise I'll let you get on probably to a well-earned beer this evening.